Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Customizing Alternative Grading for Scale remote workshop. My name is Henry Wisniewski, and I'm a third-year chemistry PhD student. And for the last 2 years, I've worked under Dr. Sobers as her TA and head TA for General Chemistry 1 and 2 lab.
And I am Courtney Sobers. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate teaching professor at a minority serving institution, and there's the cat. And I've been experimenting with alternative grading for the past 2 years. So because we're a small group, we're going to have everybody kind of introduce themselves to each other. So the first thing we're going to ask is if you don't mind renaming yourself in Zoom to include your discipline, so we have an idea of who we're talking to. And then we'd also like you in the chat. I should change the slide, shouldn't I, Henry?
That's you should move the slide.
Yeah, turns out I do that. Yeah, and you can also in the chat tell us a little bit about your experience with alternative grading and your preferred pronouns and preferred name. All right, Kat, you need to back up. Sorry, hold on. I got to wrangle the animal who decided to wake up from his nap. Like I said, he's like 7 years old again. So I don't know what I just did with my headphones out there over here. Oh. So now I have to rename myself. I forgot to. So what happens when you have to wrangle a cat? Okay, so awesome. So what level of experience or exposure has everybody had with alternative grading? Have you done it? Have you just thought about doing it? Have you sort of done it and then backed out, failed out? Something I do a lot. Yeah, how about?
Hello, everyone. My name is Heba. And I have been teaching for like 1.5 years. Just I'm a beginner, so I'm interested in ungrading.
Cool.
Or what I think that students would be interested in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yes and no. You'd be surprised.
Yes,
it's always complicated. Okay. And so we have Camille says her institution uses pass-fail grading for all courses, which you love, and been playing with the idea of doing a badge-based system for a while, but the idea of implementing it is overwhelming. Yes, definitely. Whenever you try to do this stuff, it's super overwhelming. And then Dan does not teach, so you haven't applied anymore. Okay, that's cool. You choice-based system, which yes, it's complicated, but students enjoy it. I would love to have a conversation about how you explain that to students, because I have a hard time right now doing a succinct explanation and having students understand what's happening. Yeah, so thank you all for being here. Let's see here. So we are going to start off by outlining kind of the track so everybody knows where we're coming from. So the first session was in June, titled Being Selfish with Alternative Grading. So that was a conversation about why you would do it if you're not necessarily doing it for the students. And we talked about the idea of moral stress, which I will define later in this workshop. The Padlet link to the first session that we're going to be also using today is in the chat. I believe Henry put it there. Look at that. Henry's on top of it. Thank you. And then today's session is more of a workshop style. As mentioned, titled Customizing Alternative Grading for Scale, and how do you use alternative grading when you have over 100 students in your course. I will say, because most of the classes I teach have 100 to about 350 students, my transition in alternative grading went from traditional to ungrading, and then I've backed out to specifications grading. And then the last session will be intersectionality and alternative grading, where we'll talk more about kind of what I call the hidden curriculum of using these approaches and things that you don't necessarily think about when you first start using it, but come up as you implement it more and more. So the next thing is we'd like you to go to this link. This will open up a shared Google Drive that has a bunch of examples and resources around various types of alternative grading, also specific to me. So it's a lot of my work and what I've done. It is a living folder, so I do update it as I make changes and adapt. So it has information from when I taught a class of over 300 and from when I taught a class of down to like 20 students. So you'll see kind of the spread in there. Because we're so small, we're probably not going to be using breakout rooms today. we'll just kind of have everybody do a group discussion here. Right, so, all right, so to start off, Henry's going to walk us through some definitions so that we're all coming from the same spot. Yo, dude, cat.
Yeah, so first, we want to define alternative grading because again, we're all coming from kind of different backgrounds and usage of kind of the system. So first, our approach really for alternative grading is an attempt to shift away from students' focuses on grading and more focus on their learning, right? And we do it by really promoting this kind of growth mindset that really tries to combine these three things, which is transparency, like students know how they're being graded, self-reflection, students self-reflecting on their learning and their experiences, and also giving more choice and agency to students surrounding their grades. And then we'll be, I do want to note though, that there's a recent publication, the link is actually at the bottom of the slide. I think it was a 2022 review paper that actually
2023. It literally
2023?
It's ASAP. It's like super fresh.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
super
2023
fresh.
paper, my apologies. That shows that the actual reported data about the benefits of growth mindset that we've been hearing might actually be the result of poor experimental design, and that the studies that we actually hear that connect the beneficial elements and growth mindset were actually from studies that weren't so rigorous. So we just wanted to acknowledge that as well. The two main types of alternative grading that we'll be discussing is specifications grading or specs grading and also ungrading. So specs grading, as you can see here, is really broken up into three main parts. There's the mastery of learning, where essentially it says how much have students learned the content wise. And what I want to point out is the passing thresholds. So just like in points-based systems, there are thresholds to that students need to cross over to get in certain grade brackets. The second is competency-based grading. So basically how deep do they understand the material, and also contract grading, where students basically will self-reflect on their work and have discussions around how to improve their grade or the work they've done so far. I also want to point out on the bottom, there is a token economy. So basically students are able to gain tokens by doing certain assignments. They're usually optional, things like making a study guide or doing a self-reflection. And then they are able to use those tokens to, let's say, open a late assignment without penalty, or to hand an assignment late without penalty. And this really adds a lot of flexibility that we've been discussing earlier, and agency to students, because they decide how they want to use their tokens, if they even want to do assignments to get tokens, and kind of that thought overall. Ungrading, our version of ungrading, because there's many versions, is we think of it more as collaborative grading. And in this case, students will come up with basically a grade portfolio, where they will propose a grade, and this proposal has consists of them reflecting on their work, and really justifying what grade they believe they deserve. And then they have a conversation with the instructor about that grade, and after the discussion with not only the student, but also the instructor talks to the TA, maybe a final grade is determined.
Yeah, it is definitely misleading. I mean, we started with it, you always right, once you start using a word, you realize maybe it's not the best fit. And so, yeah, we recognize that the community uses ungrading still, and that's more common, but I like to address that. I think for us, collaborative grading is more important. Also, to Henry's point, because of the number of students I have, that's why we do a portfolio, because I can't keep track of 350 students' individual work. So I do like a template, which you will see in the shared folder, that they use to tell me, to pull out certain work that I know is usually pretty indicative of their understanding, but they can also then supplement it with what they think is a better representation of what they understand. So if we are in the Google Drive, there is a handout called Alternative Grading Course versus Assessment. And it is a 2-page handout that discusses kind of the difference between how you do alternative grading for a single assessment versus how you would do it for an entire course. Yes, I did ungrading, I think 2 or 3 times, and the time to implement it and the need for support, it needs way more support than I anticipated. When I started it when we were remote, so it was pretty easy to do because the expectation was very low. Once we came back in person, it became a lot harder to kind of manage that with everything else. In addition to, I did it right after we went from remote back to in-person. So I had an extra level of inexperience that I wasn't anticipating. So yeah, it's a big reason why, especially for larger classes, I go to specifications grading. I would like to try on grading again in a smaller class, but yeah, the time and the support is definitely key to doing it well. But yeah, so in this handout, I know it's not very accessibility friendly. I need to fix it. It was just PowerPoint and I had a fight in PowerPoint 1. But it talks about different types of alternative grading that I've used. And on the second page, it does a breakdown of if you had a class, how you would go from traditional to multiple grading schemes to specifications to ungrading. So it's kind of like a stepwise increase in how alternative you want your grading to be. So I will be fixing that once I get a little bit more time to make it a little bit easier to digest. So I do want to point out that, and we're going to have you all kind of interact with this a little bit in a second, is that in my classes, when I do have a lot of students, my teaching assistants do all of the grading. And the teaching assistants are graduate students and undergraduate students. So I literally don't even look at the grading unless a student brings a concern to me. And then I have to reach out to my TA and be like, how did you approach this? What was your reasoning? And then I can have that conversation with the student. And so for that, I have to have an open line of communication with the grader or the teaching assistant that did that particular assignment. Not yet. We have part of the slides in there. We're going to modify these and then put them in there after the talk. Yeah. But Henry, it's deal.
Yeah. So as Dr. Sobers was saying is that since we do the majority of the grading, one of the things you got to think about when you want to implement an alternative grading system is the TAs need to understand that system very well. Because again, students, they really only care about their grade, and especially when they're missing some sort of points from, let's say, from a question, your TA needs to be able to effectively explain to the student how the system works and how how they use that system to grade their question, especially if it's a very new system that their students aren't used to. If the TA isn't able to explain it, it's going to lead to a lot of confusion and actually create points of tension between TA and student, and that's something that wouldn't be beneficial.
Yeah. So before we get into the exercise, I do want to point out that alternative grading is not a magic wand, right? Like, we work in a system that stresses students out, and I teach at the higher ed level. So they've had the K-12 experience of being graded, of being stressed out and dealing with this. And so even in college, I'm one of 4 or 5 classes they're taking. So I'm still the outlier to their experience. And so it takes a minute for them to kind of adjust. In another event, I had a participant mention that nursing students are told that 50% of them will not graduate from the program. And so even using an alternative grading system, if you give someone what they perceive as negative feedback, or let's say they get a not passing yet, they immediately go, I'm part of the 50% that's not going to make it. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's a limit to what it can do. Okay. So I want you to realize that, yes, it does help, probably, maybe, I think so, but you are also combating a lot of history that you had no input in. So Henry is going to lead us through the exercise, and we're all going to do it together in this room. So
yeah,
in the shared Google folder, there is the workshop example question slides. That's what we would like you to open. I can put the Google Drive link. Bruh, you got to chill. Sorry, the cat clearly just woke up and is having feelings. I'll put the link in the chat again in case you missed it the first time around. And so, yeah, so you're going to open that. Oop. And
yeah, so this is kind of the exercise. So we're all going to pretend that we are teaching an elementary school geography class, and you just hand it out an assessment. And the question that you're going to be grading is, the students are given is, draw the United States of America. Okay, and you have the question is 10 points. And so the two things we want to consider is, first, what criteria do you need in order to grade this assessment, right? What are the important aspects to answer the question, draw the United States of America? And then from there, how do you distribute the 10 points across that criteria? How do you make a points-based rubric, essentially? So the goal is to grade answer 1, which again is in that shared folder. We're also going to show it on the next slide. And there's a Google form link. And so out of those 10 points, determine the criteria, come up with your rubric, and then grade this question. So a student gave you this as to answer the question, draw the United States of America. And in that form, just put what you put, what you would grade this question, your answer. And we'll give you about 2 minutes to do that.
I feel like I should have had music queued up.
And if anyone has any hard time with the form, please let me know.
Were you gonna say something, Rissa?
No, I'm like lost. I'm sorry.
Pretend you're an elementary school teacher. Great. Or are you talking about something else?
I couldn't find the form in the folder. That was the problem.
Yeah, no, the form's not in the folder, sorry. Because yeah, it's just in the chat. I probably should have thought of that, should I have? Henry?
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, good. I'm seeing responses. Technology.
Look at you go. So proud of you. All right. So everybody, I know it was a quick think, but everybody got their vote in. Oh, there's more people now. I did not realize that. Hi, everybody who joined. So there's at least 7 people who are actually doing it. So how many responses do we have? Do you want me to switch the
4.
slide?
We have 4 people, 4 responses so far.
Okay. Well, you do have access to the, oh, we're not going to do that part because.
Oh, go back. Oh, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we got 7 people, so yeah, sorry. What did you want me to go back to?
Oh no, you're good. Okay. So yeah. So out of the 4 responses, these are the grades. Sorry, we don't have the chart on the right. That was a maybe. Yeah, so we see 2 8s, a 7, and a 5. It'd be real interesting if maybe we could hear a little bit about why you gave where the student lost points, maybe. If you would like to share.
Yeah, we'll talk through how we graded it and after this, but if anybody's willing to in the chat, or if you want to unmute, explain kind of how you got to the grade that you picked. And you can still vote if you're still thinking about it, although now it might be a little biased because you can see everything.
Well, this is Camille. I gave an 8 because I feel like without the context, I always want to grade generously. And to me, I was like, I knew exactly what it was when I saw it. There's states, the shape is approximately right. There's Alaska, there's Hawaii. I feel like they have the essence. And for an elementary school child, this feels like a pretty good start to me. So I was like, well, assuming this is maybe early on in their learning of geography, I think if that's the stage they're in, then I think it's a pretty solid effort. So anyway, that was my thinking.
I know you don't like scales, but you got to go with me. We're starting off at a traditional point, and we are going to transition. Okay, we are going to transition. We're not going to stay here.
That's fair. That's fair. I'm like, it looked B-ish.
Okay, B-ish, which is what, like 8, 9, 7, 8.
I don't really like usually 8,
You'll
9.
survive.
I would have given it an 8.5 because I thought it was pretty good actually for an elementary. I mean, depending on the level, I was like, I recognized what it was immediately, like Camille said. So I was like, pretty good. I like it.
I hadn't even thought about a map scale. I truly have never thought about that. We didn't hear about the first time, but that's probably would have been smart, right? Like because I mean, Alaska is bigger than most of, yeah. So, all right, you know what? Hey, that was something I should have considered and I did not. So I appreciate that for making me think about something new. Okay, so I can go on. You good?
Are we good?
Cat. I think so. Yeah, it's probably a little advanced, but I still think it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a group, if you don't mind using the chat, what features, like, so if you're going to answer this question when you're coming up with your rubric, what were you looking for? So what things do you think are necessary to make it clearly a map of the United States? Why am I doing this? This is your part.
Oh, I was typing.
Yes, sure, you are typing. So yeah, so what did you look for to say, yes, this is the United States versus, like, I don't know, Russia or you know, Egypt or Australia, right? The general outline is solid. Every time someone says that, like, it's amazing. It reminds me how much I don't think like most people, because you said that and I was like, really? But no, that's a good point. Individual states are outlined. You can tell. How did he respond?
It could be anything.
Yeah, proportions. Good one. That goes back with like the scale. Okay, sorry. This cat is really needy right now and sharp. Anybody else have anything you're thinking about when you're like, hey, this is what I'm looking for? Yes, including Hawaii and Alaska. Definitely key.
Good answers.
Yeah. Outline of regions, so like New England. Yes. Where are we at right now? Okay, we're doing okay. Specific aspect of the boot of Texas and Florida. Yes, the Texas, Florida. Basic drawing skills. Yeah, using words. You're not wrong. We don't all have those, and you got to practice them to get them. And I know the class. So I'm teaching organic chemistry right now, and I've seen students on my quizzes try to use Chat GPT. And if you're not familiar with organic chemistry, it's a lot of drawing, typically of hexagons, and so having a AI text generator is not super helpful for drawing. So what's that? The neatness of the drawing. Okay. Do you think we have a pretty decent list, Henry?
I think we have a pretty good list. Let me quickly copy this so we can move it on to the next slide. Yep.
All right. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. So when Henry and I were coming up with this question, so on the right is what we came up with. So the country outline is close. Again, why am I doing this? You have Texas, Florida, Alaska, Hawaii, New England. We talked about, should they have the territories because they are part of the U.S., like Guam, Puerto Rico. About the connected 48, is that north border flat because it's a straight line for the most part? Do they have state outlines? Are states in the correct relative position to each other? And then also, do you want to have natural features like rivers, mountains, that kind of stuff? So after thinking about that, we went back and said, okay, what is reasonable to ask? And so this is the rubric we came up with for our 10 points. So we said it was 3 points for the outline, right? Because if you get the outline, you can at least make a pretty good guess that it's the US. You needed to have the kind of points out for Texas and Florida. Remembering Alaska and Hawaii was 1 point. So we found that having the main 48 were worth more than having Alaska and Hawaii. You needed to have the New England kind of point. We decided to ignore territories because that is kind of a advanced thing to notice. We thought the northern border was pretty important because it is distinctively flat. State outlines and natural features, again, we didn't consider very important. So when we did this, what did we say this was graded, Henry? A 9?
A 10.
A 10? We said it was a 10. Okay, so we said it was a 10 out of 10. Keeping in mind, like I said, we teach chemistry and our expectations of student drawing ability is pretty low. So we're very generous when it comes to drawing questions. So from here, now we're going to ask you to help us transition from a traditional, so the 10-point scale, to something that looks more like specs. Now there's more than one way to do specs. The way we're going to do it isn't necessarily the way I actually do it. But the approach I take regardless is I use a needs revisions, low pass, high pass approach. Low pass is what is the bare minimum the student needs to survive the next class. So I teach a sequence course. So if they're in Gen Chem 1 lab, what is the bare minimum they need to at least get through Gen Chem 2 lab? Or organic chemistry 1, what's the bare minimum they need to get through organic chemistry 2? If it's not a sequence course, I focus on what are the things that they have to be able to do if they're going to use this information in another class in the future that's maybe not directly connected, but may call back on this information. A high pass is a student showing a deeper understanding. It does not have to be perfection, and that's something that I highlight to students. Like, we're not expecting you to be perfect to get a high pass. We just want you to demonstrate that you have a better understanding. The benefit I like of specs grading is you can include criteria around the process and the approach the student used to the question in addition to the content. So if we're going to use the criteria Henry and I came up with just so that we're all on the same playing field, and we would like you to, I guess I probably should have switched to the slide look. What of these would you put in the low pass category versus the high pass category? So you can what's the easiest way to do it? Should we do like a 1 by 1 or just have people type what they think should be low pass?
We can start with like low pass.
Okay,
See what people say, then have a discussion.
There you go. So yeah, so if you don't mind, in the chat, of these criteria we have listed there, which ones would you put in a low pass category? So that's like, you must have this to say that, okay, you probably have a decent understanding of what the US looks like. Outline, northern border, Texas and Florida, Alaska and Hawaii. Outline, Texas, Florida, Alaska, Hawaii, New England, and northern border. Oh, I can go to the, you're typing this on the next slide, right, Henry? Okay. Camille just had country outline that so we have, so yeah, sorry. So high pass, country outline, Texas, Florida, Alaska, Hawaii, New England, northern border. Low pass is, you don't want to flip those? I feel like, yeah, kind of depends on what the next lesson. Okay, yes, there is. That is a good point. It depends on what the next lesson or assignment is. Yeah, that does play a role.
Yeah, flip those passes for me because I read badly.
Okay.
Told you I needed more coffee.
We got the giant mugs going. It's all good. Let me know when you're ready, Henry.
Yep, I think I got all of them down.
Okay. To take this back a little, oh, there's another one in there. A scale. So in large classes, so I mentioned I don't use ungrading in my large classes anymore because I can't handle having individual goals for each student. So I do what I call global goals, which is why I lean more towards specs, because I can say, like, here's a low pass, here's a high pass. In smaller classes, I'm more willing to engage in that and have students have a bit more input on what would go into the rubric and the criteria that they're using. Okay, so that's what we came up with. So everybody take note. And I will put this back up on the screen once we get to the next bit. So now what we're going to ask you to do is so if you're in the workshop example questions slides here in the shared folder, we're going to ask you now to grade the one we just did and the second question. So answer 2, which is in the green that has the Canada label. So I'm going to put the link to the form. So you're going to use a different form to assess this. You're going to say, is it needs revisions, low pass, or high pass? Using, yes, they pointed out Canada, but they pointed out Canada while pointing to, it's great. It's questionable best. Okay, so here's the criteria. So decide, do you think that those answers are low pass, high pass, or needs revisions? Let me know if you need the link to the shared drive again, and I can put that in the chat. So we'll give you about 2 minutes to kind of go through that. How often does Canada get mistaken for the US and vice versa? I would hope not a lot, because those are very different.
Are we grading both together or grading one?
You're
I
grading
said
There
we
should
both.
be-
grade both together.
Both, but separate. So each of them will have a different grade.
Yes, if you go in the form, there should be 2 questions. So one says answer 1, one says answer 2. So the yellow is answer 1, the bluish is answer 2.
Can I see the picture again? Okay, thanks.
I also want to point out that I made these answers. So if you have any compliments to the artist, I would happily take them.
And if you're wondering, that's fish in the green. Those are fish in the
Yes.
green one.
Hey, I'm seeing responses come in.
He did this like with like a mouse. I was like, how? How did you do this?
Even
He-
I said that as well. I don't know how I did it.
And he did like 5. Like you should see the other ones. Like they're all like actually really well done. Okay, we'll give it another minute and then we'll keep going. And we do have a break built in, so we are coming up on that.
That is so weird.
What happened?
Just how the form worked.
Hmm.
I wanted to add new rows for some reason. There we go.
Uh,
It's all good. Oh, thank you.
right? Like talk about artistic. What was one of the criteria? You wanted drawing skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basic drawing skills. Like that person definitely went above and beyond for sure. And by person, I mean Henry. Henry went above and beyond on that one. All right. So here is, oh wow.
It's actually there's one that's not accurate, but I'm trying to fix it. Huh. Keep why is it showing 100%? It's not true. Okay, I'm gonna do the other thing.
Okay, do the other thing. I was
Um,
gonna say, wow, really? We got 100% on everything? I'm impressed.
I'll do this instead. I wanted to be fancy, but the fancy was not with me.
Do you want to just talk through it and then we can try to figure out the grass later?
I have them.
Oh, okay.
It's gonna be kind of just go to the next slide.
There you go. Okay, so for answer 1, most people said low pass. Some people said high pass. And for answer 2, everybody said needs revisions. Okay, so 1, it's nice that you see a bit more agreement. What did we say for these? We said high pass for 1 and needs revisions for 2.
Yes. We said that, yeah, the first was high pass and then needs revision, yes.
So at least we all agreed on the needs revisions. The high pass, low pass was a little bit more variance, but not quite as much, right? So the approach that we had used when we graded. Okay, so that was the agreed one. Henry and I had come up with our own barriers for low pass, high pass. And so the version we kind of did is like, you share the rubrics with the students. So the rubric we'd share with the students would have these questions on it and tell them that like your answer needs to be able to answer these questions. And then the grading rubric that the TAs would say, if they have a low pass, they have to have all of this, high pass, they have to have this. The version I actually use looks more like this, where the students are given a rubric with categories and some explanation of what I mean by the category. And it's like, did you meet this criteria or not? And then the grading is based off of how many of those criteria did you meet, and that determines if you have a need pass, low pass, or high pass. There is that. And so you can kind of break it down to whatever level you want. So for me, when it comes to specifications grading, I will say that I definitely feel like the grades students get are more believable. We're operating from the assumption that grades are a thing worth believing, and I recognize that has its own complications there. But what the students end up with, I feel like, is more believable. One, because I'm not defending point distribution to students, so it's not like, why is this worth 1 point versus 3 points, or why was this a half a point versus being 5 points. I can talk to students about how do they present their knowledge and their understanding, because that's what's more applicable in a broader sense, right? Like you can know something the ends of the earth, but if you can't present it to other people, it's only partially useful. I will also say that the rubrics don't always quite fit. So like Camille mentioned, like where's the points for exuberance, right? Sometimes I'll get an answer and be like, oh, this does not fit. And I found that I've had to just let some things go, even though it makes me uncomfortable. Or what I'll find is sometimes students they'll meet the criteria to hit a low pass, but I find it's not the criteria I find most important. But because they've hit that 5 out of 7 or whatever, I have to give it to them, right? I told them this is what you needed. They hit it, they get it. So there is that, which is always a little tough. If I'm then going to transition to ungrading, I focus on giving students feedback and helping them figure out because I teach science, chemistry, their chemistry identity and their self-confidence in the field of chemistry, and encourage deeper thinking. So I ask more complex questions, even for answers that are considered correct. So when they get their feedback, I will ask, kind of like, did you think about this? Have you approached this? How does this work for you? Is there anything else I wanted to add to that? Nope, that's you.
So you might be thinking, if you have an ungrading system where you don't have points, how do you grade multiple choice, right? Because multiple choice is very discrete. Either you selected the right answer, you didn't, or you didn't. And so to deal with multiple choice, you have to consider kind of like a wrapper-esque assignment. So basically, ask the students after or they take the assessment, reflect on how they prepared for the multiple choice assessment, or how do they know how to cancel out maybe some options, or if they made a mistake, what was the mistake, and maybe they could do corrections, or how would they avoid it in the future. What's really nice is that these kind of responses can be skimmed, so it's not much of an extra workload for you to deep dive and read all the responses, but it's a good, you just need to skim enough to see that the students are self-reflecting on their own work. I know that maybe you're teaching a course that at the end of the year or throughout the year you have standardized exams that you have to also deal with, and those are very points based, very very straightforward when it comes to how they're being graded. And basically, if you want to incorporate if you have that element in your course, it would be good to build in redundancy in some untimed non-test style assessments, especially for those students who are really just inherently bad test takers, in order to gauge their understanding on a subject or content.
Oh wait, do you want to say more about that?
Oh no, I was transitioning.
Okay. There you go. All right, so we're going to take a short, let's call it 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
We'll see. I got 5 minutes break because Henry and I need to switch who's controlling the PowerPoint slide, and also to give people a chance to stand up because it has been like 40 minutes, and we know that the listening limit is around like 30, right? So give everybody a break for about 5 minutes. So we'll come back at say 10:55, so it's a little bit more than 5, and we will continue on with the thing. In the meantime, you can also, in the shared drive folder, open the document titled Student Grade Trackers. So it's a Google Doc. We're going to be talking about that when we get back from the break. So Rissa, if you don't mind pausing the recording, we don't need to record silence for 5 minutes. And we'll see you at 10:55.
You actually have control. I am no
Oh.
longer a host.
Oh no. Okay. So
So-
right, I'm gonna resume the recording. Okay, whenever you're ready, Henry.
Okay. Oh, y'all can hear me, right? Yes. Okay. So hopefully you had a good break, got your coffee, stretched a little bit, something like that. So if you'd want to, again, if you haven't already, please go to the shared folder and open up the student grade tracker. I also have it up as well. This is what you should look like. There should be 3 grade trackers. Take a moment for them to open that. So we've had a lot of discussion around alternative grading, but maybe implementing it into your course, it doesn't fit perfectly. And so we just wanted to let you know that you can indeed mix and match alternative grading with a points-based system. So if you look at this first tracker, which I'm sharing on my screen, but also might be helpful to have on your own device, is that we have the traditional specs grading thresholds, right? We have 80% or higher, 5, to earn a C, or 10 high passes, 13 high passes, that sort of thing. But if you also look at down here at tech skills and safety also, those are actually points-based. Now, in the context of chemistry, right, in a lab with chemicals, students can actually cause some really dangerous conditions, and if not explosions, right? It's just the nature of chemistry itself. And because we really want to emphasize that a student must be safe, must be responsible and capable of working in a chemistry lab environment, we found that point-based was the most effective way of assessing a student's ability to do so, especially when they're going to move on to more advanced classes, like organic chemistry, where arguably there are more hazardous chemicals and more things can go wrong. So that's what you're seeing in the first grade tracker. The second grade tracker was for a writing class that Dr. Sobers did. I don't have as much experience with it, but you can see a similar trend in kind of how Dr. Sobers breaks down the grade brackets for spec grading. And the third one is the summer organic course. And that also you can see as well.
So what you're seeing is the difference between when I have 350 students was the first one. I had 20 in the middle one, the writing class. So that's why it's very aggressively specs. It's very much pass, don't pass. And the last one is somewhat organic, which I have about 130 students. The difference is it's a 14-week class taught in 5.5 weeks. So the criteria have to be, it's a very short criteria limit because I don't have the luxury of time to put in other categories. I would say that first one, the lab one, I'm probably going to try to take some categories out because it did prove pretty complicated for me and for the students, but there is that. I guess I'm still going here. So if you're in the shared Google Drive, I do have the Excel file or a template of what the Excel file I used for determining grades was. It can be complex. You can have, like I have in there, if you go under the specs and where it says B, oh, you ready? If you click on the one for under B, like are the B criteria met? No, not column B, under the column T, go that. T3, go for that one. Okay, so as you can see in the line, I have an if and or, and then some more ors and ands and stuff like that. So it's not a trivial coding, but you can do it. The reason I do it, so I don't use Google for this, I use Excel because I can then combine it with Microsoft Word and do a mail merge and email out to students their current grade as they progress in the class. So that's something with alternative grading that I find students really have a hard time with, is that they don't know where they stand as the class progresses, right? If you're taking a points-based system, you can be like, I currently have a 70, I need to do this. In ungrading especially, they have no sense of where they stand. And even in specifications grading, they don't always know how to keep track of things. So I can use this with Excel and mail merge in Word and just email out to them, like, this is where you stand as of right now. This is what you're on track for. This is how you've used your tokens. This is how many tokens you have. So I find that it's really nice for that. I also find that mixing and matching my types of alternative grading with traditional helps with that moral stress I mentioned at the beginning. So it's typically associated with nurses, and it's defined for taking the educator framework as the tension between the obligation you have to students and the obligations you have to the institution that hired you, right? So there's policies you have to follow, but then there's also kind of things you're dealing with the students, for example, right now. And then I like to introduce that there's also a tension there of what are my obligations to myself and my family and my home life. And so like I have in the past had a student who had some personal circumstances that I would love to have been flexible for, and was like, okay, the solution to the problem was like, you should withdraw from the course. Even though you've completed it, let's see if we can get you a retroactive withdrawal so it looks like you never took it. But university policy is like, well, if you get a grade, you can't turn it into a withdrawal. And so there's the argument of like, okay, well, what's best for the student is to give them this withdrawal. But the university says no. But then for me, to give them something else like an incomplete, I was like, I don't have the time to have you do all this work after the fact. Like I'm in a summer class, the next class has started, I don't have time for this. So that's a big reason why I use the mix and match, and that's kind of what I mean by moral stress. Now, in my small class, I did a special topics class that I haven't talked about yet, and I used ungrading. It was 5 students, so it was pretty easy in that from that standpoint. The problem was it wasn't a textbook class, so it was a lot of reading literature and applying it and interpreting it. And so both the students and I had a hard time defining what each grade would mean, like what was the difference between an A and a B and a C. Again, with organic, because of how fast it is, you know, one of the big features of alternative grading is allowing students to revise their work or revisit their work. When you're teaching, you know, 3 times speed, I don't have time for that many revisions. So I do restrict how many they can do. So they can do 1 revision a week for free. If they want to do more, they have to use tokens. The rubrics are also less detailed because again of time. So I tell them basically the general rule is if you get 80% on a thing, it's a pass. There is that. In the writing course that Henry showed, that was 20 students. And so that was, like I said, it was very much just pure specs. But I took it from the course was designed by somebody else at another institution. And I kind of just laid it on top of my institution and my course time and meeting time. And I realized when going through the rubrics that it was clear that some information had been communicated in the class, and I didn't have access to that. So when I was trying to use the rubrics, I was like, I don't know what this means and how I'm supposed to apply it. So if you do this, I recommend that you take your rubrics and give them to somebody who has no idea what you do and see if they can interpret your rubrics, because the students are looking at them, they're coming from that same standpoint. And speaking of rubrics, you also have to keep in mind that you're teaching assistant. So I don't have time to train my TAs. And so the exercise we did is kind of what I do with TAs. There's a Google form that has a sample answer and the rubrics, and I have TAs do it. And it's graded like a quiz. So once they submit it, they can see what I would have given the answer and my reasoning as to why I got there. And so Henry can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I have the quiz up here, and basically Dr. Sobers kind of has a base explanation about how the system works, especially since for me, right, for me, it was my first time ever doing specs grading. There's the rubric that's given to the TAs, and then there's student answers, and then you kind of use the rubric to put your answers. Then at the end, like Dr. Sobers says, you can compare our answers with her answers. And it was a really great way of introducing the system to us, because TAs really need to understand the system, as I mentioned before, and how to use the rubrics. So when you think about making rubrics, you got to think of first the TAs, right? Is it easy to understand for the TAs to understand and grade? And is it effectively kind of demonstrating or implementing the alternative grading system itself? But you also have to think about is we were really transparent with our students. Every lab, we actually gave our students a rubric of their own, so they knew what we were kind of looking for. The issue, though, because a lot of our questions were short answers, how do you give a rubric to students without giving away the answers? And so that posed a little bit of a challenge, I think, for Dr. Sobers when she was creating the rubrics every week. But you got to think about what goes in the student rubric, what goes in the TA rubric. And so maybe that's an element that you didn't have to think about. Also, what's really important, or a really big question that TAs especially have, oh, can I get rid of this chat? Ooh, is, will the alternative grading affect my TA's workload? So in order for alternative grading to actually be effectively implemented, and if you have TAs, they need to be on board. If they're not on board, it's not going to go super well. Students are going to have a lot of questions. The TAs aren't going to take the time to understand the system or really be encouraging that the system is better or good, the same level benefit as points-based, because a lot of students really like points-based system because that's what they're used to. So what we did is we pulled some data from a traditional from when we did a lab in a traditional points-based system and also a specs-based system. So that's what the data you're about to see. So you're about to see some graphs. So these are from teaching assistants. So basically, first we're just looking at how many hours per week did you put into working for your TA duties. And so on the left, you have the point-based system or traditional system. And on the right, you have specs grading. Or the system. And on orange, I just like to highlight the undergraduate TAs, just in case you wanted to see if that factored in. And you can see the average for the points-based system was about 7 hours per week. And for specifications, it was also about 7 hours per week. I also liked, this is the same exact graph, except I've just changed the highlighting. So now in orange, we have TAs with additional roles. So not only were there just the base TAs, which were responsible for teaching and grading, there were also head TAs, which essentially manage the TAs during the lab, act as a mini Dr. Sobers, essentially. And other ones were experimental design, lesson design, that kind of thing. So again, you can see kind of if those had impact. We also asked the TAs to kind of break down their workload per week, and we specifically wanted to look at their how long they were grading. So on the left again is points-based, orange is undergraduate TAs, and you can see they average about 20 minutes per week grading for this course, specifically for this course. For specifications, however, you see that there's an increase about 50 minutes per week grading. So there seems to be an increase. And then again, I did the additional roles if you were curious about that. So in summary, this is kind of the averages that you just saw from those graphs, that we have about 7 hours for total workload hours per week for the points-based system and specifications grading. And then for the grading, how much the time spent in grading, we have the 20 minutes and the 50 minutes. But really the main takeaway is that the overall workload per week for the TAs is the same. So that's something you should emphasize if you want to encourage an alternative grading system. Is like your workload will not generally increase by that much or change by that much. But, because there's a big but, how you distribute your time, it might change. Like we saw that there was a huge increase, right, from grading traditional to specifications. Now there may be multiple reasons for this, right? As TAs, we're used to points-based. Maybe we're just more efficient when it comes to using a points-based rubric. Also, points-based rubrics are very, what I like to call binary, right? It's either the student has what you're looking for or it doesn't, right? That's a point or that's taking off a point. In specification grading, it gets a little harder because you have to start understanding the question. I believe one of the rubrics was like, does the answer make sense? So in that case, the TA needs to read the question fully and see if the logic is there, if the wording is there. So it takes a little longer for it to grade. However, again, the workload hours are generally the same.
I do want to point out, sorry, before you keep going. So in those graphs, it only said 17 TAs. Those were low numbers because I had a course release. I typically have closer to 30 TAs, so you can imagine how that would extrapolate. Yes, how you explain it and how complex it is also changes, and how willing they are to go along with you, because some TAs get very in their feelings about, when I was an undergrad, I didn't get to be graded this way, or if you have an undergrad, they're very sympathetic of like, oh, I remember taking this class and I found this really hard, so I'm going to do this. Like I did have an instance where one of the graders actually graded the question incorrectly. They didn't know the right answer, and so I had to go back and regrade everything, which was real fun. And I would like to never do that again. So you do have to, it puts a little bit more work on the front end for you. I definitely had, sorry, the cat is having feelings. I, unfortunately, when I did specs, I was making the rubrics literally as they were due. So typically the class would have started on Monday morning and Henry was a Monday morning TA, and I would be writing the rubric in hopes I finished it before they got to the short answer question. So let's just say I'm not the best at planning ahead. So it is doable. It's painful, but it is doable. Right, sorry, go ahead, Henry.
Yes. We actually have a paper from Dr. Renee Link, which is Dr. Sober's colleague, who did a similar study. And as you can see with these violin plots, is that the general basically reflects our data that the general workload per week didn't really change. However, you can see the distributions are widely different. So again, just keep that in mind, that you, again, have to emphasize that workload, it might feel like the workload's different, but really it's the same. You're just focusing more or spending more time on one thing or the other.
Yeah, So kind of some final considerations that I found that I wish I would have known before I did it was that you'll find that students will get upset when they feel like they've missed a cutoff by one. So like if you look at the thresholds, it was like, oh, you need to have 5 low passes. And so they'll have 4 low passes so they can't get a B. And they get really upset. And so on the surface, it looks like, yeah, okay, you missed it by 1. But it's not actually 1 because in the system, there are revisions where they could have done a revision to get that up to a low pass or a high pass. They also have tokens if you're using specs grading where they can basically buy another revision attempt to try to get that up to a low pass or a high pass. And I always have a last chance assessment in my classes where it's their last chance to try to prove that they understand the concept or the topic. So there's usually 3 or 4 opportunities for the student to try to get that up. So it's not really missing it by 1, it's missing it by like 5. It just looks like 1. I will say that the revisions can be overwhelming when you have a large number of students enrolled. So I tend to make a new assessment focusing on major concepts instead of having them revise past work. I have had students when I use the system and they're upset about missing a threshold. The department chair offered to let them be graded on a traditional system. I do offer that to my students, and they responded with no, because they would have been graded even lower because they had done less work. So there's that. And as far as managing tokens, that's also something there's no good way of doing this to date. I use a Google form that exports out into a Google Sheet, but it does take me 2 computers and a tablet to do this because I have the Google Sheet open on the tablet so I can mark off when I've done it. It's open on a computer so I can filter which token request I'm working with. I have another computer that has the LMS open with the assignment so I can do like extra due date extensions and extra attempts. So it's not, it does take me time. It doesn't take long, but it does take a lot of devices to work. Token assignments are things that used to be mandatory in the class. So pre-labs, if we're talking about lab, homework assignments to help students prepare and better understand the material. But I also recommend that you keep the number of tokens available low. The first time I did it, I had way too many and it caused so much work for me. So I now don't go above 10. I typically sit around 8. We'll talk about the complications of having students use a token system in session 3 because there is a hidden feature there. And so, boop me on, Henry. So yeah, so that's kind of our big thing. So if you want to have a discussion, talk about anything, we put our contact information up there again. So if you want to contact us afterwards, once you have time to think about it, you can do that. But otherwise, we just want to offer a big thank you for everybody being here, showing up, engaging. It's great. Thank you for your time. But yeah, if you have any questions or want to make any comments about anything, we are here for that.
I am curious how you explain this to the students. Like, is this a read the syllabus situation? Do you have a video explaining it, or how are you orienting them to this? Because I know it's probably really new for most of them.
Yeah, so I'm still refining the approach. So with specs grading, I have I talk about it in the syllabus, and I share the grade tracker and everything with students, and then they have a syllabus quiz, which is how they get one of their first tokens. And in the syllabus quiz, it goes, imagine a student has hit these numbers in the criteria. What grade would they have? And it's like, okay, if they had this instead, what grade would they have? Okay, if they're here and they're trying to get to the next grade, how could they use their tokens to get them there? So that's part of the syllabus quiz to get them a little bit used to using the grade tracker, understanding the token system, all that. In the middle of the course, I also have them do a check-in of like, are you on track for the grade you want? What do you need to do to get there? And I read it and respond to let them know like yes or no. I send out grade progress emails it's a summer. So I do it 2 or 3 times because it just goes so fast. I have to do it. In class, I finally figured out a kind of efficient way of explaining it with specs, where it's like, the idea is it's like a checklist. If you want to get a certain grade, you have to hit every point on the checklist. And if you want to go above that, you have to do more work. You can get plus grades. We don't offer minus grades at my institution. So if you want a plus grade, here are these like kind of side assignments. So I have like, if you're doing the homework and submitting the in-class problems, that'll get you a plus grade as opposed to just like a letter grade. But I do have links to articles about the approach and why I'm using it. So I kind of I give them a lot of resources, and I do talk about it pretty regularly. to remind them, especially because I have that last chance assessment at the end. So like right now, they have optional exams where if they didn't pass quiz 2, they can take the exam and only answer question 2 to see if they get it right now. Ungrading was a lot harder. I mean, Henry, what was it like for you trying to explain ungrading to students? Yeah, I don't know. I can't hear you.
Ungrading was an experience. There was a syllabus, I believe there was a syllabus kind of thing in the beginning as well. And the first day we also introduced the system, we go through the syllabus together. But the issue with ungrading was there was a lot more reminding throughout the semester. So I think almost every lab the TAs had, and I had to announce because we have like a kind of microphone and speaker system that we had to keep telling the students that points don't matter in our grading, to try to reinforce kind of like, remember that, like, just try your best to answer the questions, points don't matter, because they would be stressing, right, as if it was a points-based system. A lot of confusion, a lot of student emails, because they were unsure how to assess themselves. That was one of the big issues with ungrading, is they don't know where they stood because there wasn't anything concrete for them to see, because again, we didn't really count the points. But and it was a struggle for TAs as well, because we also didn't understand where they were. A lot of our hardest effort was the longevity of what we had to pay attention to, because a lot of times our servers say like, oh, from the first lab to now, and you're like almost done with semester, did they improve? Or like, how would you say they improved? And you're like having to remember how they were at the beginning and the first couple labs versus where they are now. So that seemed to like also increased effort in that.
Yeah, but it does make the relationship with students better, because then TAs have to pay attention to them. They can't just stand there and be like, you have a 5, good. Ungrading, I say it took about halfway through the semester for students to get it, and I had to have mid-semester check-ins. Like, they had to submit a grade mid-semester so we could, one, kind of normalize, but also then they were like, oh, I get what I'm supposed to do now. Specs grading, it's hard to say because I'm doing it. I don't know. Do you know how long it took during the spring? Because in the summer right now, I'll say it took the students the full 5 weeks to get it. But I think that's because when you're teaching organic chemistry at 3 times speed, their brains are already fried, and a new grading system just feels overwhelming. But during the semester, how long do you think it took students to understand specs?
Pretty much all the way down to the last week. Because I distinctly remember, because Dr. Sobers emailed grade progresses, like the last lab, which is like a couple weeks before the semester ends.
So
and
bad.
and a lot of students were really worried because they calculated something wrong and they ended up with grades lower. We gave the progress showed grades lower, and so it showed me that they definitely did not understand how to put their work into grade tracker. The biggest issue we had was a lot of students had needs revisions from all the way back from like the first 2 labs that they completely forgot about. But in order to get a B, you can't have any before in the rubrics. You couldn't have any needs revisions. So a lot of students were panicking about that, and the fact that the tracker isn't necessarily doesn't progress the same way as what their work is doing. So if you still have a lab left to do, it's still going to show you have a C. It's not going to be proportional to the work you've done. So there was also a lot of
So
confusion.
I've changed that. Now I do adjust. When I send out the emails, I do adjust it for like what you should have had passed to date, and then I adjust the scale accordingly. So now they actually do have an idea where they stand. But yeah, that, in the spring, which was the first time I did it for that many students, it was that was not a good scene. Not a good scene. So it's hard. It's a lot of reminding them, because again, I'm one of 5 classes or one of 4 classes, and they forget when they walk in the room. There's so much in the mode, and I teach at like 8 o'clock in the morning or 8:30, so half of them aren't awake, and so it's not staying at all. So it is tough, but I think once they get to the end, they appreciate it, and they're like, oh, okay, I recognize in hindsight that this actually was really good for me. And I feel like I've had students comment now that they feel like it reflects their effort as well as their understanding, which the comment for points-based grading is always like, you're ignoring my effort. I spent 3 days studying this and I got like a 20. That's not fair. And now they're like, no, my effort is being rewarded in addition to my understanding. So
Mm-hmm. Is it okay if I ask a couple more questions?
yeah, go ahead.
So maybe I can just say both of them, and then you can respond. So one of the questions I have is there any sort of time boundaries on these things? So I know like they have a needs revision in week 1. Can they go back and do that? And is that just a huge pain for you all at the end of the semester? That's part 1. And then part 2 is whether you have these students for a future class. Like, do you feel really confident that they're getting what they need to get and they can successfully do whatever they need to do in a follow-up class? And or have you had any kind of feedback on evals or otherwise that leads you to keep doing this and feel like, yes, I feel good about what's happening here?
Okay, so that's I'll go in reverse order. So I teach the Gen Chem Lab sequence, so I see them for Gen Chem Lab 1 and Gen Chem Lab 2. And then a lot of those students will take summer organic with me. So I'll see them in organic 1 and organic 2. So I basically get like a full year with them. When I did ungrading, I definitely saw the students who stayed with me the whole time, once they got it, they were a lot better at using it and applying it and actually engaging with the system compared to newer students. In terms of, and this is something I kind of want to study. So I did ungrading where students had to, what grade did you get? Have you improved over time? We talked about it, had a conversation. I was like, yes, I noticed that you're doing better, da, da, da. And then a student went on to organic lab and they had to use a technique that they had been taught in Gen Chem, that they'd gotten an A in the lab and they'd gone on to organic and they had to use that technique, and they got frustrated and they told their TA in that class, Dr. Sobers never taught me how to do this. Mind you, they had recorded themselves doing it. So I had proof that they had been taught. And hilariously, the TA that they yelled at was also their TA in Gen Chem Lab. So it was one of those like, this is the same person you had. And they were like, she didn't teach me anything. And so it seems like once you reintroduce points, that just goes. Like they have a hard time hanging on to their understanding or whatever. It may also be like the timing, right? Like they taught them in the spring, then they had the summer off, and now they're back in the fall trying to remember how to do things. So there could have been an element of that. I think there's been other studies around spec that when you go to the next class, there's not necessarily a noticeable benefit. But there's not a lot of studies out there, and I haven't had time to kind of set up my own. So my best answer is I don't know. I think student confidence changes. But does the learning change? I don't know. But I think that by impacting their confidence, they're more willing to persist when things get hard. I've had a lot of students switch to chem minors because of the grading approaches I use, because they feel like they can actually learn it and understand it. They're less stressed in the course. I've had students in an eval actually say, I hated this grading system, but I know what you're trying to do and I think it's good, so keep doing it. And I was like, I have never in my life had a student say they hate it, but keep doing it. So that's kind of why I haven't stopped. And it does also take stress off of me. I hate at the end of the semester if I have a student who ends up with like a B and I'm like, you should have had an A, but you got this one assignment lowered your grade and you never recovered, or a student who I was like, you have no idea what's going on, but you found the loopholes and now you end up with an A. Whereas now with like specs and stuff, it's a lot more like, no, I feel more confident with the grade you got. You have a better understanding of where you got that, where that grade came from. What are you gonna do? It's for my inbox is less stressful. Like I used to get a lot of mental health emails, pictures of eyeballs, talks about emails about suicide attempts, people made up religious holidays, and like I don't get those anymore. I don't have people waiting for me outside my office to hunt me down, to corner me, to ask me questions. So that's why I keep doing alternative grading. That was kind of like, for me, that's worth it, is just not having that emotional stress at the end of every semester, especially as a Black woman and my student evals being what my job is dependent on. It's like, okay, this is a little bit easier. As far as time limit, yes, I restrict the time. I give them, so like right now they have to do the revision within a week. If they don't do it within the week, they don't get to go back to it. But that's also where that last chance assessment is, where it's like, if you missed it in that first week because you weren't sure, you didn't feel confident doing it that first week, here's a new assignment covering those same concepts that you can do. And it's shorter, so I can grade it really quickly. And because not all the students do it, it's like maybe 30 people. And so it's a pretty quick grade. Yeah, so but yeah, the first time I did it, my TAs were very upset with me because they were like, it's been 12 weeks and you want me to remember what we did in week 1. But I don't know, Henry, you want to add anything to that?
I'm not sure. Well, I just know that for the time limit thing, because a lot of times students, at least for spec grading, could reopen first week assignments using their tokens. So there was kind of like, but it cost a lot of tokens ish. But I think you talking about this just remind me that like I think one of the hardest things about the specifications, at least when we did it with Dr. Sobers, is that unfortunately Dr. Sobers managed all the tokens. So so the TAs didn't actually manage the tokens. So the way we actually communicated that students when to use tokens in the beginning was just to email Dr. Sobers.
Yeah,
And then that bogged down her work. And then she ended up using a Google form, which then also had students like change their minds half after they submitted it once. So they submitted like 5 forms. So again, at least with the token bit, it's just a very complicated system that needs to be streamlined eventually, but that takes a lot of work. But
yeah, I definitely have a concern about, do students retain information? Do they get what they need out of it? I'm not convinced yet. But I don't think it's worse than traditional grading, so that's why I'm okay with it. Because they don't remember anything from traditional grading either, right? Like you go a summer, they come back and you're like, you remember this? And you're like, no. And you're like, okay, all right. Yeah, so that's kind of so it's not making it worse, and there are some benefits that I see in terms of, like I said, student confidence, persistence, and excitement about the field. Like I get a lot of like, I didn't think I could do this, but you've made me feel like I can because I just needed more time. And once I had more time, I was able to figure it out. And I can give them time in this approach that I can't give them in traditional grading. So I like that. Anything else? I mean, a question for you all is kind of what level, and this is something I'm grappling with, what level do you think alternative grading is good to introduce? Like, I haven't used it with my first semester, first years, because I think there's too much adjustment to college and everything else. But is it appropriate for a sophomore level class? Is it appropriate in a upper level class? Is it appropriate in a class that's required for like the MCAT, the DAT, the PAT, what's that? Yes, shout out to OChem TAs, right? There's actually a lot of research on the influence of TAs on students continuing in a discipline, which I don't think TAs realize. So that's a thing. It's suitable as of second year. I think, and that seniors for sure. I think seniors is definitely a good place for it. Second year, yes, seniors are mature enough, and they're taking classes they're interested in. That's a big thing. I think if the student's interested in the class, they're more willing to engage with you doing alternative grading. Because my lab class is 1 credit. So a lot of students are like, I don't even want to be here. This is 3 hours a week, and just mad about it. So it's yes, grad students are very ready for something. Yeah, Henry can speak to that.
Oh yes.
Also, I feel like for grad students, when I was a grad student, it was made very clear to me that my grades didn't really matter. Like I needed to pass, but like beyond that, like nobody was going to look at that ever again, right? So I think that alternative grading is especially good there, because then it's really emphasizing like, no, you need to understand this on a deeper level than can you pass the test. So yeah, so we've only got 2 minutes left, and there's not a whole lot of time for anything else. Is there any kind of last minute thoughts? I do also want to talk about really quickly academic integrity violations. So students still cheat. Like I'm using specs right now, and students, it's so bad that other students are like, wow, I thought you were kidding when you said it was obvious that students are cheating. I'm like, no, they're doing it. I just find that it's less of I don't even call it out anymore in specs, because there's not a point. It's not like, okay, well, you got a 70 versus this person's 60. It's like you passed or you didn't pass. And having that binary kind of makes the academic integrity bit less important, because if they have to do a revision, they have to explain what they did wrong and what the right answer is and how they're going to avoid it in the future. And you can't. Good. I say you can't copy that, but I did have a student copy somebody else's reflection, and I was like, that's a choice. So, but thank you all for being here. Thank you for engaging. I'm glad to hear that you got something out of it. And thank you, Henry, for doing this with me again. I'm going to stop the recording so we can be done. And I hope you all have a wonderful Friday or Saturday or whatever day it is where you are. And I will see you around.